Welcome into Daggerheart characters. It's time for a couple character builds in this video, and then a couple more in part 2. This is a request from a viewer, so I do appreciate the request, and here I am following up on it. And if you have requests, let me know in the comments, and I will try to follow up to the best of my ability, as I'm doing here. I hope this is what you wanted. I don't know if you were asking for a gunslinger class or for me to make a gunslinger out of, like, you know, what you can do based on the game that you get out of the box. So that's what I did here. And in doing so, the first piece of homework that I did was I go, does the game have firearms? Which I knew it did. And then I go, what's the attack for the firearms? Can I use agility? Do I use finesse? They all use finesse to attack. So right off the bat, I'm thinking rogue is probably the best class for this inherently, to a sense. And the Night Walker would be the best subclass for that. But we'll get to that in video 2. This video, we're going to be looking at more just different styles than what you probably imagine that rogue one would look like. So that'll be in part 2, as well as another build in part 2 that's kind of different, but stylistically can be played somewhat similar to the rogue gunslinger. But, I thought about it, like, if I were to create a gunslinger class, to me the first two domains that come to mind would be like blade and bone combined for the fiction that I have in my mind of what a gunslinger might be like. Obviously midnight would be up there in the debate as well. And blade and bone already exist. That's called the warrior class. For the warrior class, I think Slayer was pretty obvious in terms of the best subclass for that. So that's on the board of options to make the gunslinger for. And then there is a domain card for the warrior class called Versatile that I thought I would end up needing for this gunslinger. Turns out not so much. Nonetheless, I thought of, what's the other blade domain that exists? It's the Guardian class. And that got me on to thinking, okay, well, I could do a video. I could look at all of the above, the rogue, the warrior, and the guardian class, compare and contrast them. And that's essentially what we're going to do. But I made the warrior class second, and I ended up kind of making like a tank for the warrior class, where I should not have quite done that, because that's clearly where the guardian is going to be, the best in class in terms of being a tank gunslinger. You might think, how could that happen? Well, we're going to find out in this video what the guardian gunslinger looks like, and then we're going to find out what the comparison of that would look like for the warrior class, because I did create, I thought, a pretty fun and still different enough option that you could go with for the warrior class. And the great thing for the guardian, though, going back to that, the best subclass is the vengeance subclass. Part of the reason for that is that the vengeance subclass gains a stress slot right out of the gate. And you might say, okay, well, that's cool. Well, little fun fact about firearms in Daggerheart is that they have a feature, all of them, called reloading, which eats away at your stress. And if this is your primary weapon, you probably want to be able to use it, and that can be pretty devastating to your stress pool overall in the long term, or at times with a little bit bad rolling. It's not the lowest chances of that happening. So, some of the things that I thought of that I want to be doing while making each of these builds, what ends up being 4 of them, is definitely going to want to invest in stress. And then just outright having a low demand for stress within the build would obviously be a benefit. And of course, ways to regain stress can also help that situation that the reloading feature has created. So keeping those in mind, trying to attack those with each class build was something top of mind while we go. One more thing to keep in mind with the gunslinger is that using a firearm prior to a tier 3 weapon means that you're going to have to stick within close range, because the only firearm prior to tier 3 is the blunderbuss, and the blunderbuss requires you to, it has close range for the blunderbuss. So up until like 5th level at the earliest, depending on, things in your GM and whatnot, and no homebrew, then That's what you're given. So we're going to work with that, and each build is going to have its own way to deal with this issue. It might take a little while before you can fully live it if you want to be attacking from far or very far range. Now, the great thing about today's video is that we're going to take that blunderbuss at level 2, second tier, and we're building around the fact that that's how we're going to fight. We're fighting within close range. We are going to be closer to the battle than what you might think of for a typical long range, gunslinger or what do they call it? Like a ranger type, when you shoot arrows, archer, any of those types of builds, going to be a little bit different from that. The blunderbuss is going to end up being our shotgun here for the Guardian, essentially. That's where we enter what you are looking. Here is the Guardian Gunslinger. We're going to look at this one first, and then we're going to look at the Warrior one. Lots of fun stuff to go over, so hey, if you're still here in 10 minutes from now, please don't forget to like the video. Comments, always appreciated for many, many reasons, including let YouTube know if you like this. Comments help to do that, so that way this gets fed to other people in their algorithms, and ultimately subscribe. I appreciate that. So, for the Guardian class, you got 9 evasion, 8 armor. You can get more armor than that. We'll go into the equipment fairly quickly. 0 agility, 5 strength, 4 finesse, -1 instinct, 1 presence, 0 knowledge is the final results there for the traits. And you look here, minor damage 27, major damage of 56 for those thresholds. So that's pretty sweet. Or major damage threshold 27, severe damage threshold 56. We also have 10 hit points slots and 13 stress slots. As I said, obviously going to want to invest in our stress, and we could have invested even more with this build, but we did not. So here is a write-up. You can gain access to this in the comments. There's a link there. It should be pretty self-intuitive to this sheet where you could download this, use it, whatever, in helping to replicate one of the builds that I make here. So when we just look right at the top here with these first decisions for my Terminator build, for all of these we're going to look at mixed ancestry options, because definitely felt like gaining a +1 to our stress slots right off the bat would be very, very helpful for these builds. That's the high stamina feature, which is a human feature. And then there were several options that are also really good depending on exactly what you want to do for the bottom feature, for the secondary feature. In this case, for both of these builds today, I went with the Giant's secondary feature, which is Reach, which operates like it allows you to treat any weapon, spell, or feature that has melee range as though it says very close range instead. And I hope to cover, I probably won't though, I'm sure I'll miss some of the synergies that offers, but in both of these builds it offers some pretty sweet synergies in different ways and really works to help make this build work. So just keep that in mind as well. For the community for this Guardian, I went Highborn. There's going to be some synergies there. Also was a little bit different. This was the third build that I made. A little bit different than the other builds in that sense too. Maybe a little bit close to the Rogue, who has Presence as like its secondary trait, I think. So that's going to make sense with the fact that we're going to be investing in our strength, going to that traits, +2 strength, 1 finesse. You could flip those and it won't hurt you. It'll just alter some things a little bit differently here and there. Not the biggest of deals. We're going to get 5 and 4 between the two of them, but I ended up going with strength here because ultimately I'm trying to, I'm more, concerned about hitting well than I am about hitting, because I am a tank and I can take several hits. I can just stand there and take it, even if I miss from time to time, because by 1, There's also ways that I can make up for this. Because our gun uses finesse, remember, the blunderbuss. +1 to the presence, because once again we are going to use one of the domain cards, which you can actually already see on the screen here, bold presence, which adds your strength to your presence when you use it for presence rolls. So we're going to have a +1, a +5, actually would have a +6 to our presence rolls when we want to. And that is going to be part of our Highborn character. This is a character who uses their physical presence and, intimidation to a sense in order to get things done within the courts that they grew up around, etc. That's the type of character that I'm going for here. Not necessarily like in a bad way, just that's how they can get things done sometimes. And put a -1 to the instinct there to finish that up. Like I said, for the subclass for the Guardian was Vengeance is the best one, but I did not plan on doing this. However, it's one of those things where it just ends up making sense, especially for this Terminator build, especially because I made that Warrior. The Warrior one will do second before this, and like it just works so nicely to be able to hold a shield in one arm and essentially a shotgun, but the blunderbuss in the other hand. Blunderbuss is a two-handed weapon, can't have a shield in the other hand without that. And for the Guardian, for our tank, it definitely made sense to have a shield as an option here. So I think that's a pretty cool visual and aesthetic as well for a gunslinging kind of person and or individual. And that's going to bring us on to the preferred equipment. We are going to be using that tower shield until we get the advanced tower shield later. Reminder, preferred equipment. I understand you may not get much of a choice on this, but I sure hope if your vision is to create a gunslinger that you at least have that worked out with your GM, that you will end up having the ability to use firearms in your campaign at some point. Since we invested in strength first, we also got the mace right off the bat. Not really a big deal. We're going to get the blunderbuss hopefully very soon, like level 2. Or even late level 1. And then later on, we'll get some knuckle claws. So there's going to be some cool abilities, cool things that we can do with those. So just looking specifically at the equipment, currently I have the blunderbuss and the knuckle claws out. I'll show you, when we put in the advanced tower shield, that brings our armor score up to 12. And we have a lot of fantastic ways that we can use our armor slots. We have a lot of ways to prevent ourselves from having to mark any kinds of hit points. Like, it's not going to get to that point very often between our armor slots, between our features as a class, between some of the domain cards that we choose, and between being able to even use stress to help mitigate that kind of stuff coming in. We can really, really prevent stuff from working, and part of that is through our armor slots, so it is very nice to have that, and it just depends on the fighting style that we're going with that day based on the opponents that we're fighting against between the blunderbuss and the knuckle claws. So this build has two different ways of attacking, of being more offensive or more defensive with those options. What the knuckle claws will get you here, tier 4 weapon, is it actually will hit a little bit harder than our blunderbuss just because of the fact that it is a strength-based weapon. Remember, anytime that you see melee, change that into your head to being short, very close, And when you make an attack with the primary weapon, you can deal damage to another target within, not melee, within very close range. So that just broadens the ability to use this, and this, I think, just works into that flavor of like the shotgun, hitting multiple targets in front of you, etc. And of course, it just makes this all the better having that reach trait in terms of how easy it is to get to use these knuckle claws more often. So I just absolutely love that. But there are a lot of tier 4, tier 3, there's a lot of secondary weapons that make sense with this build if you don't get any control over what you end up getting. But if you do have, if you are able to at least put in a word with your GM of what you would like to see at some point, the knuckle claws is the one that I, decided for this build that I made. So going down a little bit, here are the active weapons, the blunderbuss and knuckle claws. As you can see, plus 23 for the knuckle claws. They also have plus 5 to hit compared to the plus 4 to hit for the blunderbuss. If you think that's a blunder going that route, well, that's okay, but there are things that we're going to get from this strength, and once again, I don't care. Flip them. It really doesn't matter a whole lot, but that strength, I believe, is pitching in here as well to our damage thresholds. And the reason that we didn't have any armor on is because we will always have the bare bones domain card out there. So before we get into the domain cards, let's just look at our features. For the Guardian feature, you get to clear 2 armor slots. Like I said, those armor slots are going to be great for us. Spend 3 hope to do this, and having more of them will never hurt. We are hoping that we take a lot of damage. But the thing is we are planning on very rarely having to check any hit points. Of course, it will happen. Then we have the Unstoppable class feature. Once per rest, you can become unstoppable. This will help us deal more damage. If you add this, you turn this on, have it turned on all the way up, but it increases as it goes every time, I believe, that you make an attack. After you make a damage roll that deals 1 or more hit points, the target increases the unstoppable die value by 1. So it ticks up before it is no longer useful. And so the first time that you use it, you get a +1 to your damage rolls. The second time, you get a +2, and then a +3. Well, here's the +6, and now we're looking at a +27, +29. So a nice little damage boost on top of the baseline damage that we already have. And there are some other features while this is going on. Namely here, you reduce the severity of physical damage by 1 threshold. So severe to major, major to minor, minor to none. Once again, that's going to stack with the fact that we have a lot of ways to mitigate damage. You can add the current value to your damage roll, and you cannot be restrained and vulnerable. And there's another ability that we have too that prevents conditions from happening. That is part of this build, is that we are just, we're a Terminator. There's no stopping us from coming. There's no slowing us down. There's no making us more vulnerable. Of course, this isn't always going to be on or anything like that, but just saying. That's the flavor we're going for. And then eventually we did multi-class into the Warrior. I believe at level 6 we will multi-class here. It doesn't have to be level 6. So for the multi-class, obviously the Warrior class, Bone Domain, Call of the Brave Foundation for this one will work better. So let's get back over to this. Well, this is absolutely excellent. So first of all, some more melee range, very close range. So if an adversary within very close range, thanks to our reach feature, attempts to leave that range, make a reaction roll using a trait of your choice against their difficulty. Choose 1 effect on a success or 2 if you critically succeed. They can't move from where they are, you deal more damage to them. So the big one here for this build is going to be that you can keep them within your very close range, which once again is awesome with how that works with reach. So just some more benefits there. And then, of course, you get your combat training. Ignore burden when equipping weapons. That's why we're able to have a blunderbuss in one hand, which is a 2-handed weapon, while also having a shield. And when you deal physical damage, you gain a bonus to your damage roll equal to your level, which you are already seeing that calculated in these damage totals. For the Call of the Brave feature here, when you fail a roll with fear, you gain a hope. So there is a lot of recycling of our armor slots, our hope, and stress going around. We're using them, we're regaining them, all of those. So that's fantastic, and this is just one more way to do that. To gain the hope for the reasons that we want to spend the hope. And then once per long rest, before you attempt something incredibly dangerous or face off, you can clear 2 stress and gain 2 hope. So another way that we are clearing stress, gaining hope. Isn't that absolutely fantastic? Going back to the Guardian subclass here, we gained an additional stress slot, talked about that. And when an adversary within, not melee range, within very close range succeeds on an attack against you, you can mark 2 stress, force the attacker to mark a hit point. And there are other features that we have to consistently be causing our opponents to be marking hit points. That is part of this class. It's not necessarily about dealing the most damage. It's just about this consistent barrage of you are taking hit points, you are taking damage very consistently, very regularly for just existing. And here's the highborn thing. So we have advantage on our rolls to consort with nobles, negotiate prices, or leverage your reputation to get what you want. So we're just doing that once again with our strength instead of our silver tongue in terms of our presence. We're going to be, and that costs a hope. So that's one of the reasons why we like to have hope hanging around. Same with being able to clear more stress, more armor slots when we are wiping through those. So lots of synergy already happening, and we haven't even gotten to the domain card. So here's what I have in, like I said, bare bones should always be active. Rise Up is a wonderful feature that we can grab. Domain card. Gain a bonus to your severe damage threshold equal to your proficiency. So that is part of why this is all the way up there at 56. because we do have our proficiency all the way up to 6 here. And so it was 50, now it's 56. And when you mark 1 or more hit points from an attack, you can clear a stress. So just another way that we can be clearing stress when we decide, you know what, yeah, we need some stress, we'll allow a little bit of damage to come in, mark a hit point here or there, and that's okay, because we'll be gaining a stress while we have Rise Up, of course, up, which the plan would be, I think, very often here later game. And then you have the Body Basher feature. You use your forceful of your body in a fight on a successful attack, use your weapon with melee within, not melee, but very close range, gain a bonus to your damage roll equal to your strength. So, Body Basher, for some reason, is adding to this blunderbuss, but it has a range of close, not very close. So, I don't know why it's automatically being added to that. I don't really know. So, I think this is a plus 16, at least a lot of the time when you're attacking with your blunderbuss, but this damage definitely gets it, the knuckle claws, because they are working from within, not melee, very close, once again, thanks to the range, that reach feat. So that reach feat really pulling a lot of weight here to make this character, make these features just work even better. So if anybody can explain why this is automatically adding that into the blunderbuss, I would be happy to listen to that. But that also brings us on to the next one. Shrug It Off. When you take damage, you can mark a stress to reduce the severity of the damage by 1 threshold. Remember, we already have another ability that's able to reduce it. In this case, you roll a d6 after using it on a result of 3 or lower. It goes into your vault. That's okay. We've got other cards that would love to come out here. And once again, high level, Unyielding Armor is our 10th level. We would have this out. When you would mark an armor slot, roll a number of d6s equal to your proficiency. If any roll is 6, reduce the severity by 1 threshold without marking an armor slot. When Shrug It Off goes off, if we are still in that kind of situation, Brace has some wonderful mechanical synergy with what we're doing here. When you mark an armor slot to reduce incoming damage, you can mark stress to mark an additional armor slot. So if some of these things aren't onboarded at the time or anything like that, once again, just another way to handle that. And then we've got Bold Presence, which I have talked about. When you make a presence roll, you can spend a hope to add strength to the roll. So this is the card that's going to be able to help us when we are not in combat. But it costs 0 stress to bring in. If for whatever reason, especially early gameplay, this is second level card. While it's in there, we have another way to prevent from having to take on conditions, which is very nice. Soldier's Bond, one of those once per long rest usage, gain hope. We will take that. Thank you very much. Battle Cry. This is one to help our allies more. We could have gone a lot of different routes. Heck, this could be like Deft Maneuvers. We could have gone down and grabbed a second Bone Domain card if we felt like that would be more helpful to us. But honestly, I feel like I have enough stuff, so I will help the allies out here from time to time, once per long rest. And we've got Champion's Edge. When you critically succeed on an attack, you can spend up to 3 hope. Once again, that's why we do want to be gaining hope at times. You can choose one of the following options for each hope spent. You can clear a hit point, you can clear an armor slot, or you can force the target to mark an additional hit point. So that's very nice to have out there when we do have it out there. Lean on Me is going to be another way to be clearing stress for yourself and an ally. 3rd level, you can get that one up. And then Forceful Push has a lot of synergy going on and helps to make this class more controlling. I think that's one of the 3 words I used to describe it, or one of the words I used to describe it. And this card is pulling a lot of weight there. So you can make an attack with a primary weapon against a target within very close range, not melee, because of our reach. On a success, you deal damage and knock them back to close range. On a success with Hope, you can add a d6 to your damage roll, so get a little damage boost, especially early on. But all this is still very much relevant later game if or when we happen to have Forceful Push out. So like if we are playing up against a large group of smaller creatures, we probably don't need all of this damage mitigation fighting against hordes and hordes of creatures that aren't going to be dealing 56, 57 or more damage against you at one point in one hit, then you don't need all of this stuff. You can just take Rise Up, for instance, right out of there, and have one of the cards that you could have active would be Forceful Push. So additionally, you can spend a hope to make them temporarily vulnerable. A little crowd control help to prevent these hordes and hordes from getting to your mage or anything like that by forcefully keeping them back a ways. Once again, you can replicate this build to a T if you wish. I have all of the ways, information that you need in order to build it. That is going to bring us on to the not as full-on tank, but also still tanky, but dealing more damage and having more stress to play with even than that build. The Guardian-esque warrior, Gunslinger build. So this is the first one where I noticed all the nice things that Reach can do, and there are different ways that we will use Reach with this build than with the Guardian build, and we, of course, took that extra stress slot right off of the bat. Our community is going to be the Ridgeborn. Did want this to be more of a mobile build, and so the environment is hopefully not going to be able to get in the way as easily, at least for this build. So that's part of the reason why I took the Ridgeborn there. Subclass, of course, Call of the Slayer. Going to go +2 for the Finesse, 1 Strength, 1 Knowledge, and -1 to the Instinct here. And we will get some mileage out of this knowledge increase that you will see. And then the preferred equipment is going to be that tower shield we are going to use throughout the entirety of this class. Same with that early blunderbuss yet again. And then you have the my tier 3 weapon here, the Hammer of Wrath, which honestly is just has one purpose possibly per long rest, but it is an awesome purpose. And then we have some full fortified armor, which is just going to make us a little bit more tanky with this build. Once again, these are the preferred equipment. Obviously, I can't guarantee that you are able to get this equipment in your campaign or not. So as I was talking about, for the full fortified armor, when you mark an armor slot, you reduce the severity of an attack by 2 thresholds instead of 1. So just some more damage mitigation for this build. The tower shield, like I said, always ready, and then you can switch between the blunderbuss and the Hammer of Wrath. And what we're going to want to remember about the Hammer of Wrath is, well, first of all, it's a D10 instead of a D8, so and a +7 instead of a +6. But the main thing here, where we synergize with one of our late abilities, is before you make an attack roll, you can mark a stress to use a D20 as your damage die. We are going to want to deal a lot of damage out when we want to deal a lot of damage out. And it gets pretty awesome. So some of the notes I had coming into this, these secondary traits here do play a very important role depending on the build that you want, depending on the loadouts that you're planning on having, the domain cards that you're planning on choosing. You can go a couple of different routes, but also you might want to invest in your traits fairly heavily in this build, maybe compared to some others. And originally I did invest even heavier than this, but I found that really I didn't end up needing more than this +2 to knowledge, and that's the third trait that matters for this this class build. What I will say, if you are planning on making a gunslinger and not following the blueprints that I have up for you on the internet, is that I highly recommend pre-making the build at least once, so you can map out what you're going to need to invest in earlier on, because there are some things that it just depends on the domain cards that you choose in terms of, is that something that you want to invest in or not. As I said, for me, I ended up ignoring knowledge, even though I initially went in planning on bringing that all the way up to a +4, because I just found that the cost benefit of going and investing in some other things was, better to go the other routes. But for the knowledge, the +2 was enough. I'll still get some benefit from that all the way to the end of the campaign. So as you've been able to see, evasion is higher than the Guardian at 13, so we get some preventive damage mitigation right out of the bat, or better than the Guardian. We are never going to have more than 6 armor slots, though, generally speaking, because we just used our tier 1. Our shield from the beginning will be our shield till the end. And then we did invest a little bit extra in the traits once again. If you want to follow this build, I have it all out for you up on the internet, and you can find that by going to the link in the description. We are going to have a very similar but not quite as good damage thresholds. We do have an extra hit point that we can mark with this build, and we do have an extra stress. We have 14 stress there. The first card in our loadout slot, once per rest, mark a stress to sprint anywhere within far range. So this is a nice way to back up a little ways if we need to back up. Or this also has synergy with our reach feature. If you end this movement within melee range of an adversary and immediately make an attack roll against them, gain a +1 bonus to the attack roll. Nice thing here too, once per rest. So this is going to be one of many cards here, once per rest, once per long rest, that we can swap in and out. If you know anything about how I like to build my characters, I like to have some things that are going to be my standbys and 1 or 2 spots where I can swap out the most is one of the ways that I like to build out how I'm choosing my domain cards. Now, you might have seen this and thought, well, this warrior isn't really doing any more damage than our guardian, yet their damage mitigation is apparently going to be lesser so. Well, guess what? That's not exactly true. Before you make an attack, you can mark a stress to gain a bonus to your damage roll equal to twice your strength, and you can rage up twice per attack, and there's no limit on how many times you can use this per rest or anything like that. And when we beef up all the way here, now our base damage plus 37. Let's just think of that the last time I did that, 54, while practicing for this, 49 there. So we can really deal the damage, and this is not potentially wrong. This is the correct baseline of additional damage. As you can see, we did not invest in the proficiency, but our baseline damage is just insane, and our ability to when we are facing the appropriate enemy to beef up our damage works. We also have this, spend 3 hope, gain a +1 bonus to your attack rolls, so we can become even more deadly, or a +2 bonus. Is that synergizing with something? What's going on with that being a +2 bonus? I don't know. Let me know if you know. And let's go on. Here, rapid riposte. When an attack made against you from, look at this, another one of those from within very close range fails, you can mark a stress and seize the opportunity to deal weapon damage to one of your active weapons to the attacker. Now, we can once again just continuously hit opponents that are messing around with us. Then we have Onslaught. So this, although we have that excellent burst damage, when we are not activating into that burst damage, we are never going to be dealing damage once we get to this point in the game, once we have Onslaught, when we successfully hit someone that is less than major damage, which means that the target always is going to have to mark a minimum of 2 hit points. Additionally, when a creature within your weapon's range, which gets increased in some instances because of our reach feature, to an ally makes an attack and doesn't include you, you can mark a stress to force them to make a reaction roll. On a failure, the target must mark a hit point. Just another way we're forcing our targets to mark hit points here. And this should always be on. When you make a successful attack with a weapon, gain a bonus to your damage roll equal to your finesse here in this case. So that is already on and being counted there as extra damage. We have many more cards. I guess we'll do the cards and then we'll go through the our other features that we got from Warrior and stuff, which some of that we've already seen. So when we are pulling out other cards, remember we invested in our knowledge a little bit. Well, the second level card that we would have taken was Strategic Approach, which allows us to take a couple of tokens equal to that knowledge trait, and after a long rest, so once per long rest, or in this case twice per long rest, we can use those tokens to do one of these things. You can make an attack with advantage, can clear stress on an ally within very close range of the adversary, or you can add a d8 to your damage roll, so a little bit of additional damage boost, especially early on. That would be more helpful and more reliable attacking here. So just more strategic character in terms of the attacking. Then we've got some of our once per long rest types of features. Battlecry I took again here. There are other options I could have taken, but that's just the one that I ended up going with each of these types. Not good enough. Probably could have been changed out for something at some point if we wanted it to, or you could keep it. This is one where if you get to a point, maybe you would have this in your loadout, but I think, very rarely, if ever, later game. Talking about being, tanky, once per rest, when a creature within melee range would deal damage, so you can just avoid it altogether. And this one also, move out of, not melee range, move out of very close range, which what does that do? That gets us within close range, which is what our range is on our blunderbuss. So all of the better. Also, when a creature within very close range would deal damage. So this also benefited from our reach feature. A Soldier's Bond just gives us more hope. You remember that from the last one. And last up, for the grand finale of our synergies, we have our Hammer of Wrath out. Let's rage up for this as well. And then we look at our Splintering Strike card, which just... I didn't want to swap it in, but okay. So first of all, 4d20 plus 38. So what, average of 22 more? Is that an average of 60 damage right off the bat? Spend a hope to make an attack roll against all adversaries within your weapon's range, which is very close instead of close. Thank you to reach. Once per long rest, on a success against any targets, add up the damage dealt. So 3-4 targets are we dealing like 60 damage to, hopefully. Then redistribute that damage however you wish between the targets that you succeed against. When you deal damage to a target, roll an additional damage roll and add its result to the damage you deal to that target. So that additional damage roll is going to be another d20. That's another 11 damage to whichever targets that we dealt that damage to. This stacks pretty nicely. You're going to be able to deal out that damage however you wish amongst everybody that hit out with. And it's going to be some pretty massive numbers that you could come up with here by combining Splintering Strike, by increasing the range because of our reach feature, and by investing in turning these into d20s for the Hammer of Wrath. So that's, when we're going to go break up a party, that's what we do. And that is, well, almost the class. So I think we talked about the Warrior Hope. We already talked about the Attack of Opportunity for the Guardian, but what you're going to be doing for it here more so is dealing damage than, preventing them from moving away or anything like that in this instance. And then your Slayer dice is going to increase. Yeah, we talked about these, right? Your Slayer dice increases damage. I think we went through those. So there you go. That is the Warrior Gunslinger and the Guardian Gunslinger. Let me know what you thought about them. Bye-bye.